Hi guys, it's Abby. Um, half of Two Girls, One Cut. Brittany's over there somewhere. Trace is
Hello.
in.
What's up?
We wanted to say thank you so much for our 1,000 views that we hit on our Facebook first show. And I wanted to let you guys know where you can find us. We're at Nighthawk Radio Facebook page, Seth's Daily Podcast on YouTube and Spotify, and also Seth the Soil Guy on TikTok. So we decided that today, this week's episode, we're going to talk about Jeffrey Dahmer
Ooh,
because he is one of the most well-known, feared, um, odd serial killers that we've had in our lifetime. And either you know a lot about him or you know a lot about him because if if you love serial killers, he's definitely one that you are familiar with.
For sure.
So
he's kind of like the holy grail of serial
He's
killers.
he's
pretty
definitely the
much.
holy grail of serial
If you
killers.
look at serial killers, you have some unknown guys, a few of them are well known, but then you have like the holy grail, which are the Mansons, the Bundys, the Gacy's, and the Dahmer.
And the
hmm
Dahmer. Yeah.
So yeah,
So I remember whenever Jeffrey Dahmer was in the latter part of his crime spree, and I remember whenever he was arrested. I want to say it was maybe like 90 or 91. I think I was probably 10 or 11 years old whenever I remember watching the news on literally every local channel
yeah,
of the blue barrels
yeah,
coming out, being strapped on the dollies, and people in hazmat suits, people coming out of that apartment, literally vomiting as they're
yeah.
walking out over the rail of the apartment complex, and thinking to myself, did they just say that he's a cannibal?
Yeah.
What does that mean? And then really putting it together, the old boy literally tasted the flesh of his victims and thinking, what the crap is that?
Yeah, no doubt. Now that all pretty much happened. I mean, there was some. It happens. I know it was in Wisconsin, but there was stuff prior to that. But there was some signs. I mean, when we talked before about some of these guys, some of them had great childhoods, like the BTK,
Mm-hmm.
but
Really
Dahmer
normal.
did not.
Did not, sir.
No.
No. So Jeffrey Dahmer, his parents were um, dysfunctional, probably at best. His mom, to me, kind of seemed like she was very distant. Um, she had her own mental health issues. I believe she probably had some addiction issues. And it was pretty much consisted of mom, dad, Jeffrey, and then later on he had a younger brother. And his dad was very involved in his own education. So for his first part of his life, that he didn't really have much of a relationship, I don't think, with his dad because he was always a student, always trying to, get the next degree, get the next milestone in.
Right.
And he was kind of left with his mom, who, like I said, was dealing with her own demons, and then had to share the spotlight of childhood with his baby brother. So he was kind of left to his own device, kind of left, to try to figure stuff out himself. And it just went all kinds of bad from that point on,
And I
from an
think,
early point on.
yeah, I think the baby brother ended up being more of a favorite than Jeffrey.
Hmm. Yeah.
They
Well,
were,
dad was. more finished, more
Right,
established with
right.
school, with his career, and was able to maybe put forth a little bit more effort. Jeffrey was kind of seemed like he was maybe more of like the experimental kid. You don't really know what you're doing as a parent, so you just do your best and you learn your lessons and don't do it with the second one.
And if you think about it, where dad was gone most of the time with his education and mom being as dysfunctional as she was, you could see the wheels turning to the point to where what was about to happen. And at that point, he was probably looking for that attention that kids look for.
Hmm.
Even down to, sometimes your parents don't like you, and it
Right.
sounds like that she may have kind of put him in that situation to where he got hard in the mind really quick
Hmm.
because he didn't have the normal childhood, the normal parenting, things that go on to kind of that at a young age most kids crave and really need.
Hmm.
So he went out in the woods and killed animals. I mean,
He
basically,
did.
really.
Well, he also, I think, at a fairly young age, maybe 13 or 14, realized that he was homosexual.
Right.
And I think that during that time, he was impressionable and not really for sure what he was supposed to be doing on this earth. Um, and at that time in history, it was definitely not as acceptable as it is today.
Right.
And, he had a lot of stuff that he was trying to figure out himself. On top of, he really liked to carve up animals and see how did they work on the inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
And
and
so,
also his dad was a chemist.
mhm,
And so they moved into a new home because they moved around a lot, probably for dad's jobs and things. And they moved to a house in Akron, Ohio, because they lived in Ohio
mhm,
at this time.
Right. Yeah.
All through his childhood, they lived in Ohio. And dad was cleaning out some like animal bones from underneath the house. And in interviews, Dahmer has said, you know, that happened when he was 4 years old, but he remembers that because that played such a significant part in why he turned
mhm,
out the way that he did,
mhm,
because those bones, I guess, just interested him so much.
Yeah.
And
mhm,
then from there, he kind of like asked dad, like, if I put bones in bleach, what will happen? And dad knew about these chemicals, and so he
Oh yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
pretty much
They
got his
bonded.
information. He pretty much got
Well,
his information from his dad.
yeah. Well, I think it was, maybe not the most conventional way to bond with your dad, but
Right.
you
Well,
know this and I want to know this. So we
Mhm.
kind of put it together and let's just experiment and pop these bones into this liquid,
right.
into
Right.
this
It was kind of
chemical and
like
see what
their
happens.
father son, let's go
There,
past baseball moment.
let's go
Yeah.
fishing. Yeah.
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 But instead, let's go put bones in chemicals and see
Jars.
what happens.
Yeah. Formaldehyde and see what happens.
Yeah.
Which is also kind of wild that, like, as a parent, you would allow your children to play with animal bones. Um, Dahmer would call the animal bones his fiddlesticks because
Yes.
Fiddlesticks.
of the sound that they would make
Mm-hmm.
clinging together.
Clacking in his
Yeah.
pockets. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
in a way though, and I will say this, I have my boy's 18 years old, and I remember whenever my husband was in his master's program, he had to take gross anatomy. So William would have probably been maybe 4 whenever that was happening. So Chris would come home and he would tell us, all of the things about his cadaver as he went.
Okay.
And and William literally waited on his dad to come home to know what what body parts were they dissecting that week.
Right.
What
holy crap,
what
App just
what
made a serial killer.
I know
Yeah.
I made one. like he was super interested on what department were they working on, respiratory, GI.
That's cool.
Um, yeah. So literally in their cadaver, they had everything except for their brain because OSU kept that. And so we went through that with him, and I, of course, got a lot of enjoyment out of listening to, what happened that entire class. But so did my 4-year-old kid. So
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
We bonded.
All right. Yeah.
Holy, holy
Some
So
crap.
just
good.
some just take it a little too far.
Yep. Yep.
Hopefully
Well,
Mine
that's,
William does
didn't.
not.
Yeah,
Well, hopefully he
mine
does
never
not.
hasn't. Right.
and yeah, and that kind of brings me to the first killing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm trying to run through my head. Dahmer was young
Yeah. It
when he
was
committed his first killing.
well, so I believe his first one happened in Ohio, and I think it was 1978. I want
It
to
was
say
just
he
a
was
couple weeks after he
after
graduated
he
high school.
graduated. Yeah, he was like
Yeah.
18. And
Was that the
and
jogger?
well, so that was his fantasy. Like that was his ultimate fantasy was the
Oh, okay.
I see a jogger with this specific physique that looked a certain way, whatever. Um, and I abduct that individual and have complete control over them and do all the things that I want to do. But this guy, I'm fairly certain, was a hitchhiker, wasn't he, Britt?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a hitchhiker, and his
Which was
mother
common in the
had just up
70s.
and left. Yeah, his mother had just up and left. They were going through a divorce. She took the little brother. She went back to wherever she came from. Maybe she went back to Wisconsin. I'm not for sure. But basically left this young man who was like fresh out of high school, 17, 18 years old, alone in this
In their
home.
family home. Yeah.
Yeah. And the dad was living in a hotel, living in a hotel, and he was there just drinking it up and fantasizing it up for
Hmm.
a jogger
And yeah, you said
who
that Dahmer had a drinking problem at a young age.
Yeah.
young age. I think he was probably 9 or 10.
Yeah.
And then there were several times while he was in school that he was caught with alcohol. And there was several times in his career in the service where he was caught with alcohol.
I think that's what
And
got
it
him
just,
kicked out, wasn't it?
yeah. Well,
Hmm.
he was honorably discharged, but he definitely didn't have the cleanest um time that he was in there.
Yeah.
He did have some issues with that.
And even before he went into the military, he did I think like one semester at OSU.
He
Um,
did.
yeah, and he epically failed out.
So instead of a 4.0 GPA, he had a 0.45
Yes.
He turned in one paper the whole semester.
Yeah, pretty much.
and pretty much played drunk the rest of the time.
Hmm.
So that was a very short-lived um, college student career. Yeah.
Wow.
So his daddy went and picked him up and pretty much the way it sounds, didn't really give him a whole lot of option, but you're going to go ahead and join the service. But the first person that he murdered was before he joined the service, and he had played it out in his mind many times, and he basically found a gentleman that was hitchhiking to somewhere and kind of offered him, to drink a little, smoke a little, party a little, and then he would, get him back out on the road on his way. And that never happened. Never happened.
Uh, okay.
So he got him back to the house, and I believe, like, he kind of came onto him in the normal fashion. And when the gentleman realized, hey, this isn't for me, I don't want to do this, it, kind of upset him, hurt his feelings, pissed him off, or what have you.
Yeah.
And he, I believe he busted him in the head with like a barbell,
A dumbbell.
a
Yeah.
dumbbell, like a
Hmm.
weight, like a 10-pound weight.
Well, and also I kind of wondered to myself, like, was that really his intention whenever he picked up this hitchhiker? Um, I know that it ended up going that way multiple more times, but that was his first time.
Right.
And I think, he had been so used to everybody leaving him.
Hmm.
And his thought was, I don't want this guy to leave me.
Right.
So he decides to, yeah, knock him out
Well,
with a dumbbell.
and you think about what would have happened if this gentleman would have been more open to the idea of what Mr. Dahmer wanted to do.
Right. Right.
Would he have, how would that have changed history?
Yeah.
Like if that would have maybe been something he was interested in, relationship wise, maybe we wouldn't have had Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer.
That
Maybe
is
we would
true.
have just had Jeffrey Dahmer, the partner to a homosexual man,
Hitchhiker.
and they lived happily ever after.
Right.
Hitchhiker. Yeah, I don't,
That's the story you tell your kids anyway.
right, right,
So,
right.
so when you get into the meat of it, though, he ends up back in Wisconsin.
Mhm,
Well,
he
so
does.
he killed 6 people before he even got back to Wisconsin, I'm pretty
Really?
sure.
I didn't know
I
that.
think it was
Okay.
6 people in Ohio. Um,
That I'm
so
not for sure on. I know the first one was in Ohio, but it seems to
yeah,
me like the
all the
remainder,
rest were in
I
Wisconsin.
I think, but that may not be 100% the
Yeah.
truth. I don't know. I'll have to look that up.
I do remember though, after he got discharged from the military, didn't his dad was pretty much like, "You're gonna go stay with grandma."
Yep, you're
So
gonna
that
go
was
live with
dad's
your
mom
grandmother.
in
Yep,
Wisconsin.
correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And so they were two peas in a pod. He loved her and she loved him, and she was happy to have him there and he was happy to be there, and she would make breakfast for him every day. And I think he got a job right out of the gate. Um, I want to say it was the job that he had pretty much his whole adult life. I think he did have a couple little things that he did here and there, like he maybe worked at a gas station, but I think he
He was
ended
a
up working at a,
phlebotomist for
he
almost
was
a
a
year.
phlebotomist. Yep,
Yeah.
I did see that. But then he got a job at a candy factory, and
Mhm.
that was
Oh,
where
okay.
he worked. Yep, that was where he worked whenever he got caught. And I think he had put in several years at that particular job where he was a candy maker. He took
Oh, I
heads
wonder
there.
what they were putting in the candy.
Well, he took a couple heads with him. I do remember that being out in the news, like just for, because he could, he packed up, like his lunch bucket, but instead of there being a ham and cheese, there was, a skull in
And
there that
teeth.
he, yeah, and
Ham and
teeth,
yeah, ham
yeah,
and cheese,
A little
a
head
skull and
cheese
a
going
teeth.
on.
head and cheese, teeth, yeah, yeah. And he would just have
Wow.
it in his locker, just chilling till he,
Yeah.
you know, had a
And I
break.
wonder if that was kind of a moment where it was a thrill to see, how close can I get to the sun without burning up?
Yeah, like the
It,
adrenaline.
Yeah,
if that's
yeah.
the case, like he pretty much touched the sun all the time, because there were people that escaped out of his apartment, literally flagged down the law, and were returned back to him.
Yeah.
So it's like if you can get that close to being caught and
And
not
not.
get caught,
Yeah.
like his thrill was on a million.
Most serial killers are Academy Award winners
Mm,
because they can act any way they need to either not get
take
caught
spotlight.
or to
Yeah.
get somebody comfortable enough to either go with them, come to my house, my apartment, get in my car. If these guys were actors, they would all be Academy Award winners.
Right. Kind of makes you think, about how when people talk about um, disassociation, um, not viewing people as humans,
Right.
like being able to separate yourself from that element of things and just see people for animals or nothing,
Or nothing.
because
Yeah.
he literally could be doing whatever it was he was doing in the bedroom to these individuals, and the neighbor come by and need to borrow something, stop what he was doing, wipe his hands off, go take care of business at the front door, and then resume, dismembering somebody in the bathroom of his apartment.
That's and again, we've talked about it before how they can go in and out of that life.
Hmm.
Like it's really nothing. How many times did Dahmer go to work and he had somebody in a blue barrel,
Right.
just
A
like it was
lot.
Well,
nothing.
and even before that, like before he got his apartment, he was living with his grandma, and he
Hmm.
would bring these men to his grandma's house and
Right.
take them down
Leave
into
him.
the basement, and
Yes.
that would be his science lab was down in the
Yeah.
basement. Um, and there were multiple times he kind of was in and out of his grandma's house, but there were multiple times that she's like, I can't do this anymore. Like it smells so bad, like
Hmm.
you got to get out of here.
Yeah.
Um, or
Well,
she
he,
just had
he would
enough.
leave them.
She'd
He
had
would leave
enough
them
of
in the
him.
bed
Yeah, yeah,
and like pull the blankets up, kind of
right.
like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. There's a dead guy in the bed.
Yeah.
Grandma's over here cooking some soup, and you go to work and leave this guy in the bed, and
Hmm.
she has no idea that you
Right,
had company or that you killed them,
right, right.
and they're laying upstairs in her guest bedroom.
Yeah.
That's insane. You know what? Once all this broke, I don't know if Grandma was still alive.
No, I don't believe she
I was gonna
was,
say, but
Bless
could
her
you
little heart.
imagine what?
but she died that day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would. Yeah, that was probably the day she died
She died.
because
Yeah.
I mean to know that how
Your
could
home
that
was
go on
used
under
like
your
that.
house, under your
Yeah.
roof,
Yeah.
and you
Well,
not know?
and he was like the perfect grandson. Like he went to church with her.
Mhm.
They just lived a harmonious life.
And
You
how
know.
close could she have been the next victim?
See, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Nope.
Well, if you at that adage, you got to look at Ed Kemper.
Yeah,
He
well,
loved his grandpa, and when he
yeah.
killed his grandma, he loved his grandpa so much that he knew that his grandpa was going to be upset with him, so he killed
That's
him too.
true. That's true. So I guess like if she walked into something
Well,
or
but Ed
confronted him,
Kemper,
but
that was more, um, his was emotionally, his decisions were very emotional.
Yeah,
Jeffrey's were more sexually
he was
driven.
sexual.
very
And because
Yeah.
separate
he,
from the emotional part.
well,
Yeah.
and because he didn't want from her what he wanted from these men, which was
Right.
companionship,
Right.
she was just paying the light bill, really. And if he couldn't get what he wanted, there was times where he stayed all night in a like a JC Penney in the dressing room so that he could steal one of the
The the
life-size mannequins.
mannequins. Yes.
And so she
Oh,
did. She did walk in on a scantily clad, non-genderous mannequin in the bed, and it scared her. And she basically said, "You and your mannequin. need to leave. You need to
Yeah.
take your mannequin out of here.
I wonder what he called the mannequin.
I don't know that he
Be
ever said, but if it
Manny.
can be found out,
Listen,
yeah,
Manny Quinn.
yeah,
Manny
That
Quinn.
was
yeah.
Manny Quinn.
If there's an answer, I'm gonna find it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Um,
And
so
I think before he killed his next victim, he would go to these so-called bathhouses,
mhm,
um, and he would take these men into these bedrooms, and he would drug them, and then he would perform sexual acts on them while they were drugged. And I think this happened on like numerous occasions, and it got to
mhm,
the point where they were like, "You're banned. Like you can't
mhm,
come back here." And that's when he started taking them to his grandma's house,
mhm.
right?
And then to his apartment.
And
Yeah.
then to his apartment. Yeah. Yeah.
My thinking is, what in the hell? When was there ever places called bathhouses where
Right?
people just laid around and basically it was like a free-for-all brothel? You paid your
Right?
membership, go up in there,
Yeah.
and it's whatever. Obviously, you can't roofie them,
well,
Right?
but you can get down, with
You got a bedroom to get down, yeah.
listen, the
Yeah,
'80s were a different time.
I guess. Good God,
Right?
I'm glad that I was a youngin, a young babe, and not like grown in the 80s then, because that and in Wisconsin,
Right. I would think it would be more common in like,
LA or New
LA or
York.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I grew up in the '80s. I was a teenager in the '80s, and
Do
I
you
don't
remember
remember it.
bathhouses?
No, the only I mean, even anything remotely close would be in the 1800s.
Right,
That was kind of normal
right.
back then. You didn't really have a place to take a bath per se in your
Mhm.
hotel. I mean, it was you went to a bath house where there were several different rooms that you cleaned up and you took your bath and stuff. But to me, the bathhouse is a metaphor for underground orgy.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
Like
You
like
know,
the bookstores.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So I mean, I don't know what's going on up in Wisconsin. I know they got squeaky cheese up there, but
That's the right answer.
um,
That and bathhouses.
and apparently they got bathhouses up there. So
Yeah, chocolate factories, bathhouses, and cheese.
cheese, yeah, and that's how you know you get good cheese. It squeaks when you eat it.
I didn't know that, Trace.
Yeah, sure
Do
do.
you know that, Britt? It made
No,
squeaky cheese.
but
Yep, that's
I was eating some string cheese last night. But see, I'm weird, and I don't like to pull the
Nope.
string. I just want to take a bite
No.
of it. And
well.
Right.
I feel like string cheese is a little squeaky.
If it squeaks, it's fair, fresh.
I guess that means that my string cheese was fresh.
Yeah. So
Huh.
yeah, always remember, squeaky cheese is fresh.
Good to know.
Huh.
Anyway, back to Dahmer.
Yeah. See, but you listen to Two Girls, One Cut, and you're gonna get these little tidbits of life hacks. Squeaky
That's right.
cheese equals
Squeaky cheese.
freshness.
Yeah.
Squeaky
Yeah.
cheese will get you killed, apparently.
Yeah.
Well, in Wisconsin,
In Wisconsin.
if Dahmer's
Yeah.
around.
Yep.
Them Yoders,
Well,
I'm telling you.
from 1978 to 1991, I mean, it got 17 people um,
Yeah.
killed. They were all men. They
Mhm.
were all of different ethnicities.
Yeah.
He did not, he had a type, but he did not, it was not a racially driven thing. It was just whoever he found attractive, whoever was available. But he did actually have a type. He liked an athletic build, runner, athlete. He did, it seems like, prefer not Caucasian. He liked African American males,
Yeah.
um,
Or darker skinned.
darker
Yeah. Not
skinned
necessarily African
individuals.
American, but darker
Right.
skinned. Yeah.
Yeah. And once he, kind of got on the roll, it was game on, and he was every chance he got. Once grandma kind of couldn't deal with the stench anymore, he found himself a little bachelor pad in this apartment building that was 95% African American residents. And, he was one of the only white guys there. And he was looked at kind of like, at first, like the odd man out. But then he made friends with his neighbors, immediate neighbors, and everybody just kind of accepted him. And he lived there quietly killing off, a whole group of athletically fit young men, luring them by asking to take photos of them.
Yeah,
Again,
I do remember seeing that. Yeah.
yeah, he would offer to pay him, 25, $30. Let me take a couple of photos and then I'll get your money and you can be on your way. And he would bring them in his apartment, had multiple different locks on the door, deadbolts, chains, different locks to where you couldn't just in one swoop unlock it and get out the door. Like you really had to work at it. And all kinds of little storage containers and units
And you
were
mentioned
keeping.
somebody that got away, and the police actually returned them back to Dahmer. It
Mhm.
just popped into my head. Wasn't that like a 15-year-old boy?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
It was,
And he
I don't
convinced them that he was the guardian.
yes. Oh, well, no,
Yes.
he convinced them that he was the lover and that they had been drinking and that they had a little spat and that person left to go blow off some steam and basically kind of got lost, maybe wasn't from there, kind of got lost out on the street. And he had actually drilled a hole in his skull and poured that muriatic acid, funneled that into his brain. And the kid was not in his right state of mind, didn't know where he was or how he was anywhere in this
Right.
world.
Right.
And Jeff was so calm, cool, and collected that they were like, okay, here you go. I don't want to hear from you all anymore tonight. And that was Cognac.
Yeah,
Uh,
that just popped into my head that that was a 15-year-old, uh,
yeah,
15-year-old boy.
child.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow. And see, again, we go back to the Academy Award. You know,
right. Oh,
these guys can
completely.
switch in and out of personality so quick that they're it's amazing how they can do that.
Yeah, yeah. I I do remember watching all of those items of evidence come out of that apartment, and it was like a clown car just watching, you know, container after container and box after, stand up freezer after this, that, and the other, and they were just packing it down and just thinking to myself, one, can you imagine how bad that place and its surrounding areas would smell? First of all,
Well, I
like,
mean, okay, look at it this way. How many times have you been driving down the road and there's a dead deer on the side of the
yep.
road and you smell it before you get to it?
And after you leave it,
Yeah. So,
yeah,
I mean, yeah, that would, to me, that would be a similar smell.
yeah,
Well,
oh,
and I think that his neighbors even like knocked on his door like, "Hey, what do you have going
mhm,
on in here? It smells terrible."
And
yep.
it wasn't,
And
he kept saying something about the freezer broke.
his freezer broke, and
Yeah.
all of the meat inside of his freezer had
Mhm.
spoiled and went bad. And I'm pretty sure a lot of them even offered to buy him groceries,
Yeah.
and he really just had, a couple fellas over, and they were in the closet
He
or in
kind
the
of had a hankering for
bathroom.
liver, I guess.
Yep. So
Well, and
he
he
never
said,
tried their liver. He never tried to eat their livers.
wow, interesting.
No, it was a bicep, a brain, and a heart. Like he tried to fry up those three that I know
Hmm.
specifically, body parts. Like I would have went straight for liver because I love me some liver.
Well,
But
and you think most cannibals, that's what they go for. The first thing is a liver.
liver, yeah, it's it's rich in nutrients and blood and but
And
really really his issue was he was a control freak in the worst way. And if someone would have just stayed with him, if he could have
Yeah.
ever just found someone to be in a relationship with him and just been there with him, like he would not have done the things that he did, I don't think. Maybe
Well,
not to
and
the degree of which he did them.
wasn't there a guy like towards the end that he did actually spend a little bit of time with before he killed them? Like they were interested in each other?
I seem to
I don't
think that
know.
you may
I
be
feel like I
right.
remember that from one of the documentaries.
Yeah,
Like there
you
was a
may be
guy
right.
that actually was like interested in him as well.
Hmm.
Um, and then it got to the point where he was like, I don't know if I want to see you again or not. And then he invited him over one more time and he was like, I'm gonna have to kill him because
Right,
he doesn't want me anymore.
right. No, I do think that you are correct on that.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Like how sad and lonely
Right. And I
is
also
that
remember him
feeling?
saying in an interview that he wanted to feel close to these people. So that's why he would, dismember them and keep their skulls and keep this and keep that and why he would eat them and these kinds of things because he wanted to feel closer to them because they weren't going to
Hmm.
be there any longer.
Right. Mm.
Strange, but
Sad and
yeah.
strange. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well,
Yeah,
he
it's creepy,
he
man. That's
devastated so many families, and
Yeah.
I do remember watching the victim impact statements, some of them, whenever his trial was going on, like at the very end during sentencing, and I believe he got like 16 consecutive life sentences, and it was like a total of 941 years. This was that was his sentence.
Yeah.
And the family members of the gentleman that he killed got their chance to stand up in front of the court and address the court, not him directly, and say, how they felt about him, what he did to their family members, their in their lives, impacting them. And it got really ugly. It was really emotionally charged. Um, some of them just cussed him up and down, yelled profanities that you can't say again. And I'm grateful that they got their chance to say what they needed to say and that he just sat there and took it. Um, and he knew that he was sick. He knew that he was wrong.
right.
He knew that he was not doing the things he should be doing. But it was just like someone else was making those decisions for
Yeah.
him.
And I
And
remember seeing him in the courtroom, and as much of a monster as he was, you almost kind of felt sorry for him. Even though
oh, yeah.
as evil as he was and the things that he did, it was almost like it was something he couldn't control.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It
And
felt
he knew that, I mean, you could see it on his face that he knew he was in the wrong.
hmm.
And I think he didn't respond just for the fact that he didn't know how to respond. I mean, how do you
Right.
respond to, killing these people? Like the
I
way
don't.
he did, dismembering and eating and heads in freezers and putting
Hmm.
people in barrels. How do you respond to that? I mean, it's
Right.
not like you can say, I didn't do it.
Right. Or I'm really
Um,
sorry.
but you almost kind of felt sorry for him. and just
Well, and also I think that he had mentioned that there were a couple murders that he didn't even remember until like he woke up the next morning and then he saw, these bodies and he's like, "Oh wow, I guess I did that." So I also think that he was like schizophrenic or
could have
he
been.
he definitely had some mental illness
Oh,
for
without a
sure.
doubt.
Yeah.
And
And
I
you
mean,
also kind of wonder if that wasn't, passed down from his mom because,
the
I do think
mental,
that genetics play a part in it.
sure, and the
Yeah.
mental instability that she had
Yeah.
could have been
Yeah.
passed down to him. But
Hmm.
there were things that went on in his childhood that put him over the edge. Uh, when when you mention Ted Bundy, you think serial killer, rapist, whatever. When you mention Ed Kemper, serial killer, but when you mention Dahmer, that's the kind of stuff that Hollywood makes up for Halloween.
Yeah.
This guy not only would kidnap you and kill you, he would eat some of your body parts and stuff you in a barrel.
Hmm.
And I know he trolled gay bars up in
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's
Wisconsin.
where he found a lot of his victims.
So now you've got the element of a hunt.
Mhm.
You pick a victim, you hunt this victim down, and that's the stuff that nightmares are made of. And
Yeah.
but his mental instability, you're right, Britt. I mean, I feel it probably came from his mom
Mhm.
because as unstable as she was, uh, uh, without a doubt, there was mental problems going on there. And I think up until a certain point, the dad probably didn't even know, but I think he was keeping it in check.
Yeah.
That was the only stability other than the grandmother. And of course, that went on later, after the army and things. But when he was a child, the dad was the only stable thing in his life, which
Hmm.
was not very stable.
And
Right.
then as he got older, his dad was always there to pick up the pieces.
Right.
Before he had even committed murder, he had gotten in a lot of trouble with the law just for like public indecency
Yeah.
or public exposure. I think he was even, wasn't he even like a registered sex offender because he had tried to do something to like a 12-year-old boy or something, but his dad would always pay these lawyers and they would get him off.
So
Um,
I know that he was charged with lewd conduct because he was more like a voyeur. I think in that instance, there was two 12-year-old boys that were in a park, and
mhm.
he was kind of like in the bushes and like exposed himself to
Yes.
them.
And he was like, "Oh, I
So
was just peeing."
yeah,
Yes, I do remember that.
so I don't think that it got to the point where he was, as a known sex offender or
Right.
anything like that, because like you said, I think Lionel would take care of things before it
Yeah.
got to that point.
Yeah.
But he was definitely mixed all of those signals up, as far as like violence and how it interacted with sex and the different things that he found that he liked, um, or that he fantasized about, and all of that. But the main thing was control. He wanted to control their time. He
Mhm.
wanted them to want to be with him always.
Well, and also you kind of wonder, like he was never afraid of getting caught, and you wonder if it's because, well, my dad will get me out of it if I do get caught. It'll be fine.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah.
That and, like he had gotten almost caught so many times. It
Right.
was kind of like that, you know, kind of godly complex, like
Mhm.
I'm smarter than you,
Right.
I'm better than you. There's nobody that's going to be able to, catch me at
Mhm.
this
And it could be
game.
the thrill of it.
Hmm.
Well, and also he was such as like like a small, scrawny guy. So I don't think anybody would expect him to like overtake, a big, like beefy athlete male,
Right.
you know?
he was kind of a timid looking man. I mean, he was
Yeah,
tall, but he was very thin.
yeah, yeah.
And you wouldn't expect that. You're right, to take an athletic, build young man to be able to
Hmm.
overpower him. But
Right.
Mm-hmm.
with a combination of drugs and a knife to your throat, I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
People are gonna do what
I
you
yeah,
think
don't
a
yeah,
lot
do.
of them, he would, drug them and then he would end up strangling them most of the time.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
And then he would pose their bodies and take Polaroid pictures of them.
as serial
Uh,
killers do.
right.
Yep.
But I don't know if maybe it's because with strangulation, there's no blood, there's nothing that's going to compromise his photo, you know? But
Uh,
most
Mm.
of the time, I think it was strangulation.
Yeah, it definitely was.
Yeah.
Um, definitely was. The gentleman that got loose from him kind of built up a little bit of a rapport with him to let him go to the restroom. He had slipped a handcuff on him, just one. And he also made them watch a particular movie. Do you remember? He would keep it on, uh, it was a horror movie like Exorcist or something, and he would just play it over and over and over again. And while they were there, and he was, before he would kill him, he would force him to watch this one particular movie.
right.
But
Yeah,
this gentleman got out and got to the police and was brought back by the police to identify him. And not only was he found, but there was a whole other body that was in there, plus all of the parts everywhere in the barrel, in the freezers, and this, that, and the other. And that's when his whole world just ceased to exist.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And off he went.
so uh, after the trial, he gets convicted of I don't know how many life sentences.
He got 16.
16.
Yep,
So at that point, you are such a high profile in prison.
right.
You have a target on your back soon as you
Mhm.
get there.
Hmm.
And he dies in prison just as violent as he was to some of his victims.
Some of his victims. Yep, 100%. Yep, he
Yeah.
was bludgeoned to death
So,
by another inmate. Um, I don't remember the exact weapon, but he was beaten so severely about his head, his neck, his chest, that there was no stopping it. Death had come for him that day,
Mhm.
and a lot of people rejoiced.
yeah, and and that's understandable. Um, Especially the victims of the family.
Right,
Um, they it was probably a good day for them.
right.
You're right. Death had came, and its name was getting beat to death,
Mm-hmm.
which that had to be horrible. But
Mm-hmm.
um,
Kind of
you
reap
live
what
by
you
that sword,
sow.
you die by that sword.
Mm-hmm.
So
And he expected it.
yeah,
You could tell by his interviews whenever he was in the penitentiary that it could have happened at any time, and he was always looking over his shoulder. He always knew that that was a possibility, and that was just his day.
yeah, for sure. So, well, guys, we could probably do another hour
I
On
totally
Jeffrey
think that
Dahmer.
we could.
without a
Yeah.
doubt because
There's so much more information that we didn't even touch on.
I
But
agree.
Mhm.
Dahmer was so open about literally everything. He gave
Mhm.
literally, every single detail to every killing. Um,
Mhm.
and so yeah, I think there's enough information out there to literally do another hour on
Yeah,
this.
you bring that up. It's like if you ever talk to these older soldiers that were in World War II or Vietnam, those happened 60, 70, 80 years ago. and they can talk about certain things just like it happened yesterday.
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
So, in the mind of a serial killer, a lot of these guys remember every victim. They remember details of each victim
Mhm.
that is just burned into their brain.
But
And
it's
that's
also crazy how some of them are just completely disassociated and they don't remember a lot of them. Like they don't know the name, they don't know what their face looked like.
right,
But
or do they?
or
You know,
do they? You're right, you're right.
so
But I think Dahmer was just so emotionally, mentally, um, I guess invested
yeah.
in each one of these victims.
Mhm.
Another hour we
Um,
could do so easily, but
I
we have
know.
got to
mhm.
go,
I
guys.
wish he was
Remember,
still here. I would love to interview him.
it's
I bet
no
he would
Me
give
joke.
us
too.
he would give us
All the
the
deets,
whole
all the
spiel.
tea.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah, and that is the fun thing about serial killers. If there's a fun thing about them,
yeah.
you can get these details, and they remember them right down to
I
the very
know.
little thing.
Abby,
So
I bet he would
Yeah.
send you a message
He would
back.
email me. I know it.
Yes. Yes, he
you do
would.
have a rapport with a few.
Yeah.
So, well, with that, guys, let's remember Nighthawk Radio on the Facebook page, Seth's Daily Podcast for YouTube and Spotify, Seth the Soil Guy on TikTok. Keep looking. We
Yeah,
got shows
man.
coming on there every week, every day. Seth's putting shows out. So remember, Two Girls, One Cut. Let's get another one to 1,000 views,
Yes,
and
please.
let's
Thank
make that
you.
happen, guys. It's been fun. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. uh,
Always, Chris.
Yes,
I enjoy it
always.
quite a bit. So, guys, with that, we bid you adieu and have a good night.
Thank you,
Thanks.
guys.